Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Open Book. A polite reminder to please keep your masks on throughout the session today, but how wonderful it is to be here in person after such a long time. Huge congratulations to the team for putting on such a wonderful event, and thank you for having us. I'm Aoife Lennon-Ritchie. I'm a literary agent, and I have the privilege today to talk to three wonderful writers. C.A. Davids is the author of The Blacks of Cape Town, which was shortlisted for the Edinburgh Festival's First Book Award, the University of Johannesburg Debut Writing Prize, and the Sala First Time Published Author Award. She has a new novel, How to Be a Revolutionary. Hold it up so we can see. Finuala Dowling is a creative writing teacher, poet, and novelist. She has published 5 collections of poetry and 6 novels. Her latest novel is The Man Who Loved Crocodile Tamers, which is just released yesterday, I've heard. And Nancy Richards is probably best known as a radio journalist. In fact, you'll probably all recognize her first by her voice. She's also a print journalist, a podcast host, and a media trainer. She's the founder of the NPO Women's Zone and the Women's Library at Artscape. The Skipper's Daughter is her first, but hopefully not last book. So today this session is called The Architecture of Words, and although I do want to talk a little about these latest books, the session will mostly be about the process of writing. We'll talk for about 45 minutes, and then I'll open up to everyone else for questions. So, do you want to start with an easy question or a hard question? Easy. Easy, are you sure? Okay, sure. Okay, so where do you get your ideas?
Oh,
Finuala.
I usually have a problem, a question in my head, an unanswered question, something that really worries me that I want to work out in fiction, as if the fiction were going to supply the answer. And
does it supply the answer?
I think it does. I mean, the answer as in understanding why. Very often I want to know why somebody took a particular action, and I can only work that out by putting them on the page as a character and following them.
So you follow them?
I like to get into their minds.
Okay.
Yeah.
But are they in control, or are you?
I think I'm in control, and that lasts for the first 2 minutes of authorship, after which the characters very much take over. And I think that's just a necessary humility of writing, to pull yourself back and not be bossy.
Nancy?
Oh, well, I actually really want to say I don't have any ideas, because I've just written the one book, and it was my mother's story, so I feel a little bit imposter syndrome. I call it a memoir because it's mother's story. So I can't say that I'm overladen with ideas. I might have ideas, but whether or not any of them would actually come to fruition, because having spoken to so many writers, I am in awe of people who take one little idea and turn it into a novel. It's almost like it's a little plant that's been watered. And I'm just so conscious of how much time and energy it takes up. So I wouldn't, if I had an idea, I might put it into a drawer and close it for fear of it turning into a great big thing that I just couldn't deal with.
Well, I think I have to disagree with you, Nancy. I think there are lots of ideas in that book that you can see on the page. Your writing is very novelistic, actually. Okay. Your book reads like a novel. You can't put it down. You need to know what happens to these characters. And although there is the real story there, we'll talk a lot later about how we take non-fiction into fiction writing and vice versa. The characters come alive in a way that they couldn't with just the flat recordings of what had happened. So I have to disagree with you vehemently there.
Okay, I think it was mother's spirit.
I think it's you. C.A.?
I guess I have quite a complex internal dialogue going all the time, and somehow it ends up becoming a book, and then I guess I add more complexity, because I know that lots of people said that, like, why did I have so many strands and so many thoughts? Like, it's internal dialogue. I think I'm not even sure that I'm trying to resolve anything. I don't know. I think that's the part that makes me a writer, because I mean, I think there's something unfathomable that you want to write, that you're drawn to writing. So it's not just about telling a story necessarily. It's the act for me of just actually creating something with words that I feel compelled to do. I mean, it's a horrible process. I hate it. You feel self-loathing when you're writing, because it just takes up so much from you, but you can't not do it as well. Did I answer you?
Yes,
Not at
but
all,
actually that
because-
almost answers my hard question, which if you'd voted for the hard question, and that was, why do you write? Like, why do it? So do you know why? Are you just compelled?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess I am compelled. I mean, look, I've always been obsessed with words, you know, so words became books, which became novels, and that's always been the way I've interacted, I think, with most of the world. I think books have always been portals for me to other worlds, or bridges to people or ideas. So that is the one, I think, enduring and endearing, you know, I've always loved books, always.
I'm sure that's
So
true for
it's the
everyone
same.
here. Is it? Were you all big readers as children?
Huge reader.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, clearly. I mean, your book is full of references to all sorts of early childhood writing.
yeah.
But if I could take the difficult question as well, why do you write? I think it's a little bit like storytelling. It's a way in which you can make sense of things. I mean, you've got so many ideas in that book. There's so many things going on. It must have kept you
So
mentally.
sorry.
No. Au contraire. There was just so much. And I thought, how do you deal with all this? But if you take a simple thing like the relationship that you have with your mother, which I can't
Simple
say that it
thing
was
like the
simple
relationship
thing,
you have with your mother.
but it sort of helped unpack it. And if somebody says, "How was your day?" you have to think, "How was my day?" And if you were to tell them how your day was, it would be one thing. But if you were to write how your day was, all manner of stuff would get churned up and come out. So I think writing, although I'm not a writer, it does help. It's harder, but it's truer. It's a bit like letter writing rather than a phone call. If you sit down and write a letter, then you get the stuff.
Yes, because it's all you. There's no dialogue. You can't pick up from what somebody's responding. It's the blank page is there, and it's all down to you. And what is your process? How do you write? Like, when do you find time? There's a bit from Finuala's book, actually. I want to quote from your novel. It says, "When in the day, in life, do you find the time to write? What do you do about the sadness that descends when there is no progress? When writing becomes a lonely and inhospitable place you find excuses to avoid? Why write at all when the world already contains so many books? Who do you think you are, believing you can write a book that anyone would want to read?"
So the question is when do you find the
Yes,
time?
how do you, well, I think people don't find time to write. I think they make time to write. I think if
make
we were all
time,
waiting for time to arrive that we could write, it would never come. So how do you make time to write, and what does that time entail? Is it first thing in the morning? Do you write every day? What is your process?
I write every day from Monday to Friday, and then if I'm working on a novel, I work on the weekends too. And my first novel, I had a very young child at that time, and she slept in my bed. And she was a very anxious child. So I would creep out of bed at 5 and go down to my study, and sometimes she would sleep until 7 or 6:30 or whenever we had to get her ready for school. But if I was unlucky, she would come before then. And then she would just have to sit in the visitor's chair, which is very forlorn, this little child who just wanted to be near her mother. So it was extremely hard, but it set me off on this very disciplined pattern of writing early in the morning, because you can't write, you're inhibited to write if you think that at any moment someone's going to phone you or drop you an email, come into your room and speak to you. So I think those early hours, and I mean, I'm very admiring of people who can work late, but I imagine that the midnight owls are the same, that it's time where no one else can get hold of you. And so, yeah, I've had various strategies about creating time, because we were talking about, a little bit about trying to earn a living as well, you know, because funny thing is books don't earn a living. So I would, whatever job I had, I would save up money from the job. So my first novel had to be finished in 3 months, because that's how much money I'd saved. I'd saved 3 months' salary. So I worked out that if I wrote every day from the 1st of December until the end of February, when I had to go back to teaching, and it worked out. So that, so I think each book has come with that kind of strategy, finding the time, and then every day I write about 1,000 words that aren't part of a novel, that are just a diary, which I can then use in my novel writing, especially for weather.
And for the novel, how many words do you write a day? Do you have a target that you want to reach before you stop?
I have a target of 1,000 words, but I have Virginia Woolf's 200 words a day as my backstop.
I represent a writer who writes 500 words a day. It's on her to-do list, same as the laundry and what she has answering emails, and she just ticks it off. And she does her 500 words, and then she stops, and then she goes about her day. Nancy, how about you? What's your process?
That is so disciplined.
It's very, yes.
But I have to say that I remember once talking to Finuala, and she told me that you write every day, you know, whatever's going on, you just write it. It doesn't have to be great art or great science. It's the weather, it's the people you see walking down the street. And it sort of stayed with me, because I thought it was such a good idea, because you go back and you mine that. When you need something, you go back and you find notes from January the 15th, and there's some little wonderful sort of nugget of bits of writing. So although you sound terribly disciplined, actually you're grasping things all the time.
Yeah, no, it's actually quite chaotic, you know, at the desk.
And could I also just say, sorry to hijack you, but that Finuala has also, the aforementioned nervous child or anxious child is now an award-winning poet herself. So it rubbed off. So it was all worthwhile.
Yeah.
Isn't that so?
Yeah, I didn't maim her. She's very good.
First do no harm. In terms of when and how, for this particular book, it was lockdown. What a gift. And how many people, somebody was telling me this morning that Jodie Picoult has just written a book, the latest book, and it's all about COVID. And I thought, jeepers, she was quick off the mark, because, you know, she's known for her research, but she would have had to been doing it from the minute we were locked down straight on. So there was time, and had it not happened, that book wouldn't have happened. But I think, I'm not in the least bit disciplined in any shape or form, but I think that a lot of the writing process perhaps happens when you're walking, when you're driving, when you're in the shower, when you're making tea or supper or whatever. So, you know, you have these wonderful lines, and heaven help you if you don't write it down, because those wonderful lines have completely gone. But in some ways you're writing all the time, if not at the keyboard.
Okay. And CA?
I was listening with admiration, because you actually have like a disciplined approach, so I'm going to do the 500 word. I can't do 1,000. I think 200 is not going to get me much. I mean, it's very similar. When I wrote my first novel, I put my daughter very anxious, living in China, and she had a peanut allergy, and everything was peanuts, including the vitamin D that they gave her when she was 4 months old at the clinic. So I had to be hyper vigilant. So I was writing my first novel. She'd have to have a nap, and then I could get. I bet your daughter was the same. 30 minutes. That was it. A 30 minutes nap, and then, you know, I would have to just find time. You know, if my mom was there, she would play with her for an hour. So I had 1.5 hours. So it was a very disjointed process. And now I've got a full-time job, which is very full-time. So to be honest, I'm not writing right now, and I have to find some time to actually do that. Yeah.
But when you do, there's no time for procrastination then? This is what I'm hearing. Or is there time for procrastination?
You know, I can't remember what was it. Oh, no, not Ali Smith. My favorite Irish writer, and I can't remember her name.
Alice Smith's Scottish.
No. Irish writer.
Maybe didn't she?
No.
Yeah, Irish
The
writer.
Gathering.
Oh, Anne Wright.
Yes, Anne Enright, thank you. She used to, I don't know, my child would not have sat while I rocked her with my foot. That would not have happened. So I know she wrote her novels as well with young children, and that was how she managed to do it. She would put them in the thing, and she would push them and write.
Lucky.
No.
My
I mean,
kids wouldn't.
that's the dream. I mean, now my kids are a bit older, so I can actually, churn out a body of work. And just by the way, can I say, Alice Smith also included something in her novel about COVID, and I read that. I think that was spring, but just a very small piece. So I think she was writing, and she incorporated it towards the end. So
I suspect there won't be many books that don't mention COVID in the future. But
they're not getting acquired, There are too many now. So I think that, there are too many books about COVID, and I think acquiring editors are saying no to lots of them.
And I was thinking, I wonder how many books are going to be about Ukraine.
I wonder,
somewhere down the line.
Yeah.
But could I just say about the 200 words, 500 words, 1,000 words, it's one thing to have written those words, but they might not be the right words. And one might have to go back and rewrite them, and there may be very few of the original words. So it's not just the writing and blasting it all out. It's the rewriting, it's the crafting. And when I saw the title of this talk, which is The Architecture of Words, I thought, woo. I felt that I have a plank, and these two have carved pillars. Because it's not just the getting stuff down. It's working it and the playing with it, and that must take a whole lot more time than 30 minutes or even an hour.
And how do you do that? When you come the next day to the blank page, do you read over what you've done before? Do you work on that, or do you start fresh? When do you edit and rework? At what point does that happen?
Well, I think that the editing and the rereading is very helpful when you're a bit stuck about where you're going to go. And I mean, it was Hemingway who said you had to end the day before on a sentence where you knew what would be said next. So that does make a difference. But if you are stuck, then I just find reading over what you've written before, and maybe working a bit on that, and just getting back into that rhythm of and the feel of that. And do I want to do something very different now? Am I moving on, or am I doing more of the same of that? So editing happens. Obviously, there's a whole editing process that happens at the end, but there's also a partial editing that happens in the course of writing, and a whole lot of chopping and changing and moving through the manuscript and driving myself dilly by writing the end and then going back to the middle and the beginning.
And just tell me a little bit about the editing process then after you've submitted it. When do you feel it's ready to go to somebody else to have a look at, to your agent or your editor or a friend? When is that moment? When do you know, yes, I'm ready, it's done, I can hand it over?
Me?
Do you want to go first?
I don't think it's ever done. So if I were to read now, I have to be quite cautious. In fact, Audible did the book, and they asked me to audition to read the book, my own book. I didn't get the job because I was editing as I was going, and you have to read exactly what's in the book. So I didn't get it so it's never entirely done is my answer, because I mean, I think it's very rare that you actually write a sentence which is just the way you, and it does happen. So, something happens that day, the alchemy is right, you've read some Nabokov, or you've read something really good that just opens your brain up and the words flow, but that's quite rare. So, I mean, generally, it's a big clunky sentence, and then you have to, I mean, I guess we work with different, like for me, there has to be a particular rhythm. And I don't know if anybody else hears that rhythm, but I know it's there. And so when I'm reading it, as I'm editing, it has to have that flow for me. And then you just keep, you just have to keep, when the sentence is done. And I guess when the book is done, it's done. And then it's not really done because you have to rewrite it again at some point. You have to edit. Joanne Joseph, who was chatting yesterday, had many, many drafts of her novel as well. Children of Sugarcane, which is beautiful. And so that's what you do. I mean, that's the process. You keep rewriting until you're satisfied. And clearly, I'm not satisfied yet. So.
But at some point you let it go. And what is that feeling like of letting it go and putting it into the world and saying, now I need other eyes on this, another opinion, maybe somebody to take a red pen to parts of it, say, oh, this is not working, this is going, this has to go, this character isn't working. How is that one? What does it feel when you hand that over? What does it feel like? And how is that process? How do you manage that process with your editor or your agent?
I find it appalling. It's the moment you fall out of the dream, and then everything becomes significant. I become completely paranoid. I take silence as condemnation. If they tell me they're on page 16, I feel I have to tell them. It gets much worse after page 16. So I become very neurotic. And I start to imagine the book from their eyes, whereas up until then I realized I had only really been thinking about it as my book. And then I think about how other eyes change a book, how each person makes a new book when they read a book. And it's always been, I've always had a feeling of when the book has come to an end, when it's ready to go. But this last time, for this book, I made an error. And so I received devastating feedback upon devastating feedback from the first readers, from a sister and then from an external reader. So it was extraordinarily difficult.
What do you mean you made an error?
I thought the book was ready and it wasn't. And they were right. And I don't know how I slipped up. It could be because the book is so big and more ambitious than my other books, or I'm just getting bad at this.
Do you have, speaking of handing the book over, do you have an ideal reader in mind when you're writing? Finuala?
Yes. I have one ideal reader who was the person who took me into writing in the first place as an adult. I had this long correspondence with an editor, not a fiction editor, an academic writing editor. And in our covering emails, I would talk a bit about my life, and he would start pointing out that paragraph could be a poem, that paragraph belongs in a novel. And this correspondence continues. I mean, just the other day he told me I had to go and write a poem, and I wrote it. I mean, so I think you do have an ideal reader, and your ideal reader is the one who truly gets you, who gets you so well they actually see the finished work before you've even written it. So I feel very lucky to have that person.
Nancy, do you have an ideal reader? Would it be your mother in this case?
Oh, yes. I'm sure she has read it, and she was a bit of a stickler for spelling, and she would have said, oh my goodness, you spelled it all wrong.
Would you tell us a little quickly about what the book is about, so that people know why I'm asking about your mother?
Can I tell you two things before I do? This thing of when is a book ready. I once spoke to Marguerite Poland, and she had just written The Keeper. And she was telling me it's the most beautiful book, and she is one of those writers where, you just sort of want to sort of bow and scrape, because and she told me that when she wrote The Keeper, I don't know if it was her editor or reader or somebody said to her, no, it's absolutely lovely, but you have to cut the first 17 chapters. And I thought, what? And she said, so I did. And I suppose, it's your book, so it's up to you to say absolutely not. But at some point, you have to just give your baby over to somebody else and believe them, because you have to. You can't just do it all by yourself. So that's just one shock horror story. The other story is about the writing and the process of the writing. And for me, with this one, it was less about the writing, which was sort of just bringing all this stuff together. And it was more about the construction, because I was sitting on all this material, and I thought, I just don't even know how to do this. And it was at that point that I called in the wonderful Karina, who said, just do it, which was helpful. And I think of your book and your book, where you're, you know, back and forth from China and Shanghai and Cape Town and different eras and different times, and I'm thinking, how did you get that lot together? And with your book, where we're in 1917, we're in somewhere, and we're also moving around in time and place. So you have to, before you even write, and then, you first have to construct it. So do you, like, have a little, if we're talking about architecture, have a little scaffolding that you've got your scaffolding and then fill in the bits? I mean, that for me, with both your books, I thought, gosh, this is no coincidence. You're both all over.
Yes, and also to just echo what you said, where to start your story and where to end your story. I have to say that I get submitted a lot of books, and I often give the advice to chop out the first several chapters, because often people start too early. You can see that they're writing the process, they're figuring out what the story is, who the people are, but we as readers don't need to see that. We just need to start a bit later when things are going already and they're a bit established. So yes, do you plot first? Do you have a structure, an architecture that you fill in, or do you wing it?
Going forward, yes. Probably because my life is so busy, but not with this. I didn't have a structure, no, which is why new characters kept on walking in. But no, I mean, this novel came together quite organically, which sounds like, you know, like a airy-fairy thing to say, but it actually, it came together because, yeah, sorry, I don't know what to tell you why there were so many temporal shifts. I had no structure, but I did end up at some point knowing, you know, that the characters would recur, and then it was actually an architecture, you know, that's what it was. It was putting pieces together. It was, you know, constructing something. I mean, it wasn't for me, I've always thought of it kind of more like carpentry, because you take this chunk and you have to, you know, you have an idea of what you might create. Doesn't always come out exactly, but once you've got the basic frame, then you start refining it and you start polishing it and you make it more beautiful, and maybe you add a few things or maybe you lose a few things, but that's how I've always thought of it. So, but the next novel, I've already written a structure because I was forced to. I had to give a proposal to someone, so I had to. So, but no way will it stay that. It'll completely change. But just to say that my ideal, I don't have a particular ideal reader or someone in mind. Honestly, it's just someone who's willing to engage with the work openly. That for me, and I was very lucky that I found in my agent and my editor people who got it, you know, to the degree that, but then I've also found readers. It was so interesting for me because I keep on encountering someone who read something in it which was utterly unique. So that was what you said, that was lovely, you know, that the book becomes something else with every reader, so.
That's lovely. And Finuala?
This time around, for the first time, I used an Excel spreadsheet because I was covering so much time. I was covering a whole life story, and that life story was set against world events, some of which my character was involved in. And so that became quite important to me and quite a useful reference point for the novel, for as I was working on the novel. And thinking about how to come into those world events, how to come into a historical scene, but to come into it with humanity, not with, nobody wants the history. It's boring, it's tedious. So what is the human angle? But in order to do that, you have to know stuff about the time. So I did a whole lot of research as well.
Yes, I wanted to talk to all of you about bringing fiction and non-fiction together. So both CA and Finuala have written novels, but within the novels there are real people with real lives. And Nancy has written a wonderful story about her mother and her mother's life. And she's written around her mother's journals and around news articles and brought it all together in a very novelistic way, in a beautiful way. So I wanted to talk to you all about the process of marrying fiction and non-fiction and how that was for you and how you figure out how to meld them together. Who would like to start?
Well, I'll start, because I had the gift of all the material. I had, and that was where the architectural bit comes in. I had Mother's log. She went off on a journey around the world, and she wrote the ship's log. So I had the log. What a gift! And I had the letters. More gift, because she was a squirrel, so she kept all this stuff. So I had letters, and I had press cuttings, and I had photographs. And grandfather was a poet, so I had the poems. And I had her voice, because she used to come and visit me, and I remember saying to her, "So what happened?" And so I had her voice as well. And then she wrote letters about her memories. So I had all these ingredients, you know, all these different things. And in terms of architecture, it was like, how do you put all these things together? And I just have to share this with you, because I was giving this some thought, and it kept me awake, this whole architectural thing. And in Wales, there's a little museum called St Fagans. And what they've done is they've taken buildings, from crofts to mansions, from all over Wales, and dismantled them, and brought them to this one area, and they've built them up again. So you can walk around this outdoor museum and see all these different bits of architecture. And this is what this felt like. Because there were letters which were in one voice, and then there was her memories which were in another voice, and grandfather's poems which were in something else, and her rather sort of diary, you know. So there were all these different things, and my little voice, and I thought, oh, you know, what am I going to say here? And I toyed with the idea of writing it from the point of view of the office boy, because I thought, this is not about me, but the office boy didn't work. So in the end, I just had to sort of put all these bits together. But it was, so I relate to your book, although it's very different, because you've obviously got so much stuff. How do you cobble it together? You know, I felt like I was, you know, I had sort of a bunch of nails in my mouth, and I was sort of hammering them together, bits and pieces. But eventually, it did all sort of float together. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but that was an observation.
Finuala?
Well, just to say that this novel was set off by a real family history detail. My father didn't speak about his life at all to us. Anything we learnt about him, we learned from our mother. And he died when he was 56, which at the time I thought was an immensely ancient age to die at. And when I was about his age, I started thinking, his death age, I started thinking about this novel and about one detail my mother had told me, which was that their marriage was nearly interrupted by a crocodile tamer who sued my father for breach of promise. In other words, my father was engaged to a crocodile tamer. And as we sat by the fire that winter evening, I said to my sister, I think her name was Karinga. And we Googled her, and we didn't get anything with Karinga, and then we saw it was a typo, it's Karinga, and just, you know, Google lit up. There were even YouTube clips of her and her crocodile. She was so famous. And I had been living just oblivious to this massive detail in my father's life, that he had had an incredible romance, a romance so passionate that this woman wanted to walk into the church in London with her crocodile. Oh. And they had to put priests outside to stop her in case she came. And I thought, why have I been so incurious? You know, and why did he never speak to us? And so more and more details came, and I obviously researched Karinga's life, which is not freely available, but quite a lot, and certainly all the newspaper clippings, you know, every time a crocodile, one of her crocodiles, which were not crocodiles, they were actually alligators, bit her, or she had a ring stolen, or there was some scene, and she was in the news. So there was all of that. I got a sense of her personality. But my father's personality was still quite secret. But then I sort of I found the school magazines from 1928 to 1935 of Radcliffe College he'd attended. I think I did it a bit sneakily, and used the root of the index. I'm not sure it was publicly available, but I traced all these PDFs of the school magazine and found him actually mentioned, you know, what he said about Hitler in the debating society in 1935, and his whole life started to come to me. So once I'd done all that research, what I think it was like building a diving board. And then the day came when I was going to write the novel, and I thought, okay, so now we walk to the end of the diving board, and now we dive in. And that's the fiction.
Amazing.
Wow.
Wow. CA, I'm sorry that you have to go after that.
Yes, yes.
I can't top that. I mean, you know, because there was so much internal dialogue, there were so many things that I needed to answer for myself, things that had happened in South Africa, things that had happened in China, and then Langston Hughes walked into the novel as well, and that just happened. So there were lots of factual events that I felt I needed to be true to, and then I could kind of embroider the fiction onto that. But that's not necessarily how other writers work. I mean, I just felt I had to be. If something happened in 1948, it had, or the 4th of June. In fact, the 4th of June kept recurring in my book because it was the 4th of June, Tiananmen Square happened in China, so I write about that. On the 4th of June in South Africa, Richard Reeve was murdered, who was a writer from Cape Town who communicated with Langston Hughes via letters in the 1950s. So, you know, there were lots of little it was serendipitous. It was more than, it was just, yeah, there was lots of serendipity. So I could embroider on those things if I was faithful to the dates. But there's a Kenyan author, Yvonne Adiyambo Uwo, and she writes beautiful novels as well. The Dragonfly Sea, and I forget the other one. Really beautiful novels, and I happened to chat with her a couple of years ago in Johannesburg, and also she had, you know, there was lots of fact in her book, and I said, so, you know, what's your approach? You know, you have to stick to that date, you know, and she was like, oh, no, I can say anything. I was like, but you have to be faithful to that particular event. It actually happened. She was like, no, I can do anything. So she'll take the date and she'll do whatever she wants with it, you know. So we know 1948 happened as an example, but she will completely fabricate something else. So I guess it's different approaches, but I think you both differ because you were speaking about people who were very close to you, and so they were very, you know, for me, some of the people, I mean, no, it's really completely detached from me, but I just have this bedrock of fact, non-fiction, and then I pile my own.
And you must have done that a little bit as well, Nancy. You filled in the gaps.
Yeah, I suppose one of the ingredients is this thing of memory, and memory versus truth, and memory as you remember it. And, you know, like you, it all began with this, what happened on the little boat. You know, it was that sort of thing that stays in your mind. And when you think of that line, you think of the kitchen that you were standing in, and you think of what, you know, all the things around it. But then it becomes your memory, your fragments of memory become the story. And I felt quite responsible because I thought, oh, this is me remembering, this is me embellishing, embroidering, as you say, and creating something. But is this really what happened? Have I got carried away here? Am I putting words into these characters' mouths? And then we hear again and again that the characters, it isn't really your book, it's your character's book, you know, because they get involved. But in this case, although the key characters are all dead, there are some extant members of the family who have very different memories. So it was quite difficult. In fact, I contacted various members of the family and sent them emails, and there was one cousin who I haven't seen her for a long time, and I said, what was your memory, Mary? And she came back with this email, and I thought, oh my goodness me, we definitely don't all have the same experience. And that was really quite a wake-up, because I thought you just have to be, you've been given this gift, and you've been given this responsibility, or you've taken this responsibility, but you have to be very careful with it. It is yours, but it's not yours to mess up. All you can do is come as close to the truth and be as honest as you possibly can be with your fuzzy memory.
And how has your family taken to the book? Have they all read it?
The family? Oh, but they're all so nice. I dedicate it to my sisters, and they all think it's just wonderful. But nobody has been terribly honest. And if they've got doubts, I think they're just so pleased that I've finally done it, because I've been talking about doing it for 33 years. And, you know, members of the family would say, are you ever going to do this book? And I said, yeah, well, you know, and I'd actually made up my mind that I probably was never going to do it. I'd come to peace with that, or made peace with it, but then lockdown.
Thank goodness COVID happened.
And then COVID happened, yeah. So once I started putting out feelers, they all got terribly excited. So I think that they were just very relieved. And Karina knows this story, but as I was producing it, or it was beginning to sort of float together, I had this image of a little boat, and people kept arriving on the boat. Karina was first, and my son, and then various family members. So the boat became quite crowded, but we were all pulling together to make sure that this beastly book finally made it into the harbour. So it was very much a collective. And as I say, I don't know, everybody's been very nice because they're family.
But speaking of your little boat and people clambering on, I would love to hear a little bit about your path to publication. So I know two of you have agents. What was that experience like, approaching agents and working with an agent and working with an editor and a publisher? I think maybe a lot of people who are quite interested in knowing what the leap is like, going from writing a book for yourself and then handing it over and having it out in the world, and what that path was like for you, and maybe some advice perhaps for some writers in the audience about writing and also about your path to publication. Would you like to start, CA?
Sure. I mean, I found my agent, maybe 5 years ago, and I just emailed her. She's based in the US, and she'd worked as, I don't even remember how I came across her. I emailed her and I said, in fact, I think she had put out an advert somewhere or something saying that she was accepting. Okay. So I sent her my manuscript, and she phoned me one day and she said she'd love to do it, and then that became a whole journey. Just a wonderful process. Because
was she the only agent you approached?
At the time, yes. I mean, I might have approached a few agents before on and off, and no one had been interested. But for this novel, she was the only agent that I approached. And that was just a wonderful experience, because she'd been an editor, so she's edited some really beautiful books that everybody knows. And then she became an agent at some point. So I kind of got the whole package with her, because she was the first person who'd, I think, read the novel in its entirety, and she was my first editor. And so, you know, she'd push back, you know, so she always saw me coming, you know, if I did something which, you know, seemed strange to me, she saw it. So, you know, that was just a wonderful process of making sure that I had solidly made every decision that I meant to make. So she would say to me, did you want to do this? And why did you do this? And so she never actually changed my writing. And so that is a process that I'm quite wary of when someone starts to rewrite your work at a sentence level. I'm not going to do that anymore. Now that I've seen how it can happen, she never did that. But that was my agent, and then it actually went to an editor at some point, and she never touched. My editor is a Chinese-American man, which was very important to this work, because I write in the voice of a Chinese man at some big chunks of the novel. So I needed to have a publishing support system that was quite diverse, so that I wasn't writing out of an experience that I had to do a lot of research to make sure that I was speaking the right voice and that I wasn't being offensive. And my editor, he never changed my work at a sentence level as well. So that was quite important for me. So he was, you know, it was the architecture that he was, you know, some things he asked me to take out, which 99% I said, yeah, you're right, and I took it out. And then 1% I pushed back and I said, no, this has to stay. So that was, I mean, I have to say, I feel very, very fortunate that I worked with my agent and my publisher, because they have been just really supportive and kind, and very, very kind people. So that's also quite important to me, because it was the first time that I'd taken a book internationally. And so that was just a lovely, a beautiful process, and I was very lucky. Yeah, and then of course I published here as well with wonderful publishers as well.
And Nancy?
Well, my original intention was just to publish, or it was just to print a couple of copies for the family. But then I approached Karina, and she said, well, you know, we could maybe publish a few. I'm not sure if I've got that quite right, but that's how it happened. So I didn't really, I unashamedly used Karina as a sounding board. And because this wasn't really going to be a book as such, it wasn't really quite such a painful process. I think there was more sort of self-angst. And the one thing she said, which was really helpful, was just work with the material and it will come together. And so I did exactly that, and I typed everything out, and so it sort of came together. So I don't think there was no fisticuffs saying you've got to take it out. It was just, maybe it's in hindsight, but it felt very effortless. But as I say, maybe in hindsight, there was a lot of angst, sort of personal angst, but it was easy.
Oh,
I think.
Good.
Wasn't it?
That's an unusual answer, I think. And Finuala, I know you work with the wonderful Isabelle Dixon.
Yes, Isabelle Dixon turned down my first novel. She turned me down having read my first novel. And then she approached me after she'd read my third novel and said, now it's time. I have the contract ready. So, and it's been a very fruitful relationship in that I think, well, she's taught me something. She's actually changed the way I teach, because as she goes through the manuscript, she highlights the things she likes and doesn't say anything about the things she doesn't like, or doesn't say very much. And I just thought, what a great way of getting people to do more of what they're doing well and leave off the stuff they're not doing well without actually saying anything rude in the margins. It was just, I could see that she was doing it very quickly on her train journey from Cambridge to London, and that didn't matter to me. It was just that she had swept her eye over the page and highlighted what was good on that page. So I've learnt a lot from her, but unlike CA, I haven't managed to be published internationally, and I would love to be. Isabelle is going to present this book at the London Book Fair
Next week?
Next week.
Great.
Could happen.
I've neglected to mention that I was rejected so many times when my agent Anjali, she put it out to, so let me just finish that story, sorry. It wasn't all that smooth. She sent it out about 3 years ago, and I got about 15 rejections, and the most beautiful rejections. They were lovely. And so I felt so flattered and so happy, but they all said no. And then we took the novel back, and we sat with it, and based on someone who I really wanted to be published by, based on her commentary, I forgot this. I rewrote big chunks of it. She said that the English was too formal for an American market. And so I wouldn't ordinarily have responded to that. But then I thought about it, and I thought, well, what if I just change this sentence and I take out some, and I just kind of, what's the word?
Condense, compress.
Compress words as well. So instead of having it very formal and, anyway. And so I tried it, and it read so much better, and it flowed so much better. So I thought, well, why didn't I just rewrite? So it wasn't the whole novel, there were pieces. So I rewrote it, and then we resubmitted a year later, and we got...
To the same editor?
We didn't, because she'd retired.
Okay.
But we resubmitted, and then we got picked up. So
Fabulous.
it's a long process.
It's a long process, and the submissions Isabelle made to American publishers came back with, she's too quiet.
Gosh.
So got to get noisy.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a thing to say, well, I really loved it, we sat with it, this is what this person said, and it was a publishing house I really wanted. But it was too formal, the English was too formal. I'm like, yeah, I'm South African, it's not an American, but it worked. It worked in my instance, just to twinge a little bit, not too much. But I mean, it's a brutal process. It hurts because they say, well, we thought about it, we discussed, but no. So,
Can I ask a question of you, as an agent?
I don't think anybody would.
But I mean, how is it from the other side? Because, you know, the writers are sort of telling you their experience, but I mean, to what extent as an agent are you brutal with your writers?
It depends on the writer. I always try to be kind, but also practical, and because my job is to make sure that I can place their book. So there's no point in saying it's wonderful, this is great, don't change a word, to make them feel better if it's not going to help them place their book. So it really depends on the writer. Some people are just give it to me plain, just give it to me straight, and some people, they don't want to change anything, and that's also fine. It really depends on the author. I had one author who had a very particular goal in mind. She wanted to move from writing children's books to young adult books, and she wanted to sell internationally. She'd already written lots of books that were published here, but nothing had gone overseas. So she said, whatever it takes, I want to do that. So she had to rewrite the book 3 times, so she wrote it 4 times in all before we found an overseas publisher. So it really does depend on the strategy, the goals, the relationships. But I'm quite brutal. I have a reputation of being quite brutal, I'm afraid.
And if you get a comment like, well, she's too quiet, how do you, I mean, do you go and address that? Do you then noisy up your books or get a bit more wow? What do you do?
No, I think there's great beauty in quietness, and
Absolutely.
Some of my favorite writers are quiet. I mean, the New York Times is talking about Anne Tyler, her latest book, and she's always been quiet, they say. They accept that now. I think it's Jonathan Franzen and some other noisier writers have kind of spoilt it for us.
But there are people who are looking for quiet. So Isabelle will find the right person. It's just a question of finding the one person who
Well, it's a
feels
bit late
passionate.
now. I've got a bit noisy.
Well, there's room for it all. I think we must open up questions to our lovely audience. We've only got about 8 minutes left or so. Would anybody like to ask a question of our writers? We have 2.
For a friend. So I have a friend who is, I have a question for a friend that I know that is South African. So he has published a book on Amazon, but he's not a known writer. And I know he, what tips would you give him, And he has a quite unconventional writing style. It's very Bret Easton Ellis like American Psycho kind of. But the book and film. But what tips would you give him, as a aspiring, he wants to, of course, become an actual, writer, but what tips would you give him as, what would be the next steps for him, right? Because I think that he also has experienced the processes you have shared, like everything from, when you beat yourself up or whatever it is, but what would you, give him as an advice to unblock himself to the next step?
So my
All of
advice
you.
would be to keep reading and keep writing.
solid advice. Solid. Can't add.
Would you have any advice for this
I mean,
writer?
as a teacher.
And grow thick skin, because it hurts.
I think to write the book he wants to write and not the book he thinks is going to sell. I think people who publish on Amazon are perhaps going for dollars and not being inspired. I mean, he must purify his well source.
And there's not, I mean, unless you are able, I don't know, some writers do make money, lots of writers do, but I don't know any of them. I don't know, I don't make money. So that's the first thing, you're gonna have to do it for the pure love of it. And if money comes, it's gonna be a long process. It's gonna be like a 20-year process, but so, yeah, just do it because you don't know how not to do it, maybe, I don't know. Although that also feels like it's insincere, but it's true though, right? You do, because you just can't not do it.
Yeah.
I would say that he needs to, as you say, why is he writing? He needs to write to himself, why am I doing this? And perhaps interrogate himself.
Yeah, write the book you want to read. If you were a reader, you would want to read it, and don't imagine some other, you know, there's, oh wow, well, sci-fi sells, so I'll write that.
Yes, exactly. I think you can always tell when people are writing to try and make a quick buck. It somehow doesn't feel that the authority isn't there. It's not necessarily
But it
genuine.
works sometimes as
It does
well.
work sometimes.
And you can write for television now if you want to make money.
Yes.
Right? You can? No?
Yeah.
Not me, I can't. But maybe someone can.
Another question?
Thank you so much for sharing. So my question is like on the architecture of words, right, and the construction of a sentence. I'm interested to know, like for example, we've got like a whole dictionary of words as writers, right, at our disposal. So I'm a poet, and like I always try to choose words that are as close as possible to like the feeling that I'm trying to express, right? I'm interested to know for you guys, like, what is that process like? Like, how do you say, I'm going to say condense or compress? Like, how do you choose? And is there a certain sort of meaning or process that you go about in doing that and creating that meaning and the story?
Finuala, can I maybe ask you to answer that, because you are a wonderful poet and novelist and a teacher.
I think I like your question. I mean, there are just so many words to choose from, and how do we sieve them down to the ones we want right now? I think it starts with your kind of tone. You imagine yourself speaking to the reader, being conversational. And so a whole lot of words drop out at that point, all long-winded words, all the sort of words like aggregation, or, you know, you choose simpler words, and you're going for that very beautiful rhythm, and you're thinking about beauty and rhythm and not repeating yourself and creating interest within the sentence. So it's a sensual experience, which I think you'll recognize as a poet, where you are actually listening to the sound of your own sentence, almost reading it aloud in your head, as well as using the sentence to build a picture, you know, with those best possible words. So I think it's, the dictionary is one thing. The thesaurus, I have a Collins thesaurus that I've had to have rebound because it fell apart from such love. And I don't know if you ever find this thing where there's a word and you just can't remember what it is, but you know some of its cognate words. And so you go to the thesaurus with the word you half remember, which isn't the word you want, and the thesaurus in its list of 100 words gives you the one you do. And that takes up, you know, half an hour, and you got one word.
Can I just say that I was, having read fragments of both CA's book and Finuala's books, and I was thinking, you know, it's not that they use such great big complicated words. It's the order, well, no, it's, with respect, melancholy. But it's just that it's the order in which they're placed. It's the unexpected, because I was trying to think, why is their writing so interesting? And it's the unexpected phrase that is perhaps not in the order that you would expect. And, you know, it's quite simple stuff. It's just the way in which it's put across.
And layered. The meaning is layered in all of your books as well, in a really, kind of really beautiful way.
Yeah.
I think that's all we have time for, everyone. I want to say thank you very much to our amazing panelists. And again, thank you to Mervyn, Vasti, Frankie, and the whole Book Lounge team and the Open Book team for putting on this wonderful event. And hopefully we'll see you all again in September. And thank you all again for coming.
Thank you.
And thank you. Thank you.